Leave me in the comments how your runs have gone, if you already have Emilie or Yellencone and Aqua or Yellenchero in your Giro. And today we're going to see the best teams both inside and outside Emilie's Burn. Let's see surprises. Let's see some team that no one expected. Let's see a specific team that I think in NATLAN. You can climb a lot more because surely the Archonte has a lot of synergies with Emilie, and you can see that in NATLAN. Both Mualani with the fumes on Burn and Kinnish and their synergies with Crepita and Burn as well as Emilie. That they will be good teammates. Not only is he a good character and has very good teams already, but he seems to have a very large projection and potential for the future, so leave a good like, a good ulti of Bennett, subscribe and leave a good comment for the algorithm. See you in the directs. Link below the description. Guests, see you there, and thank you for all the support. Remember that it's free, that it's helped the channel a lot, the whole team that we grow up to keep giving work to many more people, and to get the channel to position itself. Recommend, and now before NATLAN arrives, let's blow up the region and go with Emilie's top teams. Alright. It's really fun because luckily I've played all literally, and having played I can all bring you gameplay from. Everything we've been testing these days with Emilie, we're gonna start with a team that wasn't expecting me at all because Emilie, I think everyone knows that within playing Burn has basically 3 variants of teams within the short Burn, and from there I will develop you. The first variant of the 3 variants of equipment are the Burn itself, or a burning equipment of both 2 Dendros and 2 Pyros and Dendro, Pyro. An ammo for the theme of Green Shadow and the bonus elemental damage to Pyro. Then we have the reverse melts on Burn. For Ganyogriothas Ayaka will mainly tell you about them, and then we have the teams to crack with Burn base. Where here I will also explain to you things that have mostly surprises for the amount of application that some since made. You know the game in a very deep way, you will have understood, and then I'll also tell you about Emilie's teams outside. Remembering the premise? Emilie as a Dendro support, I told you it's not good. Should not be good first impressions by damage, but only by application, Dendro and by energy, and yet damage. Out of Burn is still quite powerful. It reaches Nahida if we talk about Chero versus Chero, and it also gives us if you complement it. With another Dendro as it could be Baiju, that does not apply incredibly. Gives us a fair and necessary application for most teams no longer only against a single enemy that also, because Baiju and Emilie beat the enemy. But if you know, bring the focus correctly in rooms against several enemies like the 12-1 first half, that you will have some equipment like this. That explain all this, we start with Burns we'll talk, and you'll see gameplays of 2 Burn teams. The first burning equipment provides a pure burn that would basically be something like a Kinnish team, but I played it with Tignari. You can also play with Alhaitham, and as you see it is a Tignari, Emilie, Xiangling. Bennett is an interesting team with Kinnish, will be a lot more powerful because it's made for pure burn, is not the Lee. I've been surprised by all the teams, but because playing other teams that have exploded and blew my head off. Playing this gave me the expected performance, but the expectations were higher because I previously played this team. Other things that went down the halls of a rotation without having certain characters that are very raw, the pure burns. They cover very well, but apart from this team of Tignari, the burn team that has surprised me the most, and that I will encourage you to try, is the team with Arlecchino. This is the team that I will explain that represents perfectly the burns too. Its maximum splendor, and that if you try it will surprise you very much, is a team of Arlecchino. Emilie, Katsuha, Bennett, wait, you're playing a monocore pyro for Arlecchino. There's no vaporize, that nothing happens either because Arlecchino vaporizes 1 in 3 hits, and this doesn't contribute so much to its damage as it doesn't make it worth it to carry either. Mastery, as I explained in Arlecchino's build, with what you're really here to play with Emilie, which is an amazing sub DPS. And it has a very high damage, and all this that you're seeing the gameplays is Emilie Chero badly built, and you know how I explain. The build can improve enough if you want to see the build or see how I myself have built it. Go to see the build that is. The video that I uploaded the day before, you saw this one, and basically we have the monocore pyro, we have buffos to Arlecchino. We've got Arlecchino doing a spectacular damage. We've got Emilie being a spectacular sub-DPS. We all have a perpetual burn on the enemies, which life is literally melting them, I think, to all the ball. Combinations of possible equipment on this same burn this to this day is the most powerful, of course, that in between. Of Arlecchino, you can play other carries, but the character that most damage multi-target and uni-target has to date too. This team is the Arlecchino itself for the area of its normals by the attack climbers and the attack buffs themselves. That can give you Bennett Arlecchino, and especially for the car heating, since here the damage of burn by Emilie's talent. It's reduced a lot and it doesn't really affect you, but you've got the self-healing sustain and you're not taking Fiorina. Because it doesn't take life of the team and because it doesn't look a bit more harmful, so to say, like the teams of Arlecchino with Fiorina. This would be the burns, both pure burns and future burn with. And as Arlecchino's burn that I think is the best burn team today, we go with the next team that are the inverse melts you will see a gameplay of. Ganyu, but I'm very clear with the reverse melts this Ganyu team. If you're not going to play with D-High in the stall, it only gives you 12 seconds of ulti, and Ganyu, in the end, when loading the loads, is worth the redundancy because it takes like a second and a half. 2 per load, and in the end, you put at most 3-4 loaded is annoying the inverse melts. I have realized that. To this day, they are no longer for Ganyu. It is true that if you remove Xiangling and put D-High, you lose the damage of Xiangling, but the damage. It's actually Emilie the Ganyu D-High is going to let you do well with those loaded with Ganyu. But it seems to me that what I'm going to do to recommend directly is not the team of inverse with Ganyu. The team of today's inverse with the inverses. Try a Bennett, Xiangling, Emilie, and Wriothesley here. Wriothesley, especially if you're one with the load, you're gonna melt, and you're going to stick 100 and 100 or more with each load of the cone every 2.5 seconds is finally a clean core of reverse retries. Wriothesley, that can be played comfortable, and that would finally recommend because the previous one was with Nahida. But Wriothesley, then with Thee, who matured also melted and went down all his own life, and the poor little one ended up, because you know how, and now with Emilie no. You have the collection, the damage that's gonna hit you yourself with burn Wriothesley. So it's the core, the Wriothesley, Emilie, Xiangling. Bennett is a spectacular core here. You can switch to a Xiangling for Kazuha is complicated, but Kazuha could even fit the green shadow to cryo with one of the elementals, and then get on Pyro with Bennett's ulti, with which he has enough. I prefer it with the Xiangling truth because you throw the ulti you forget, but it is true that with Kazuha then the rotation is reduced because Wriothesley has cooldown of 16, Emilie fits any Bennett 15, and Kazuha 15 Xiangling would delay this. Team took 20 rotation for a Xiangling's cooldown, with which, and here disclaimer, this is one of the teams that we'll talk about, rather in which it seems that Mavuika fits for being an Archon support Pyro in the future, that it is a team since Bennett. Mavuika, Emilie, Wriothesley, and probably much more powerful, and have adaptive cooldowns to 15 possibly, and perhaps more. Emilie's teams fit inside the inverse melts. You can try something similar with Ayaka, which happens that Ayaka, if the enemy does not move perfect because he eats the ulti of Ayaka, but if the enemy moves a little bit, he went to take out the team's hurt because Ayaka's ulti is going that way. She fell that way to the wooded one. You know, you have to know how to get up and down. And you're left without the damage of the team. Now, third variant of Emilie's teams that would be crackling. And that's where I've got the most exploited head in the end. A cracking team is a burn-based team. You can play triple mastery Alzoma. Mythical that I do not recommend much because it is very annoying and requires too many things to play it well. And yet, it's shield. It can't hold and it's going to explode. But yesterday, we discovered a team that I think is Emilie's best team. It's the one I'm leaving you with to recommend, and is the one that I think the most is going to play with Emilie. Is basically a team where you have all the buffos with a spectacular synergy with each other, and you have a Hydra that is not only the best character in the game, but because of its quantity of it. Application being less than Yellen and less than Xingqiu makes perfect two things that is vaporizing on the burn your own hits and besides generates Semilitas, so that Xiangling, that is the Pyro, makes crack. We are talking about the current best crackling. From the Bennett Xiangling, Emilie and Fiorina game, here we can switch to Fiorina maybe for an Ayato or something that doesn't apply. As much as Xingqiu have tried this team with Xingqiu to play a crackle, and it is totally impossible to play it with Xingqiu because only vaporizes on the burn and then removes its own hydro charges, i.e. the enemy application when needed. It generates a bloom with which is totally amazing the team, and is another team that looks to me that with Mavuika will improve. Other teams, but still has a very high damage, own Xingqiu. The damage here comes from cracking, because jump enough is crackling. We have Bennett with his Bufo buff attack Bufando, Xingqiu, and Emilie. And we have Fiorina giving the bonus damage inflicted on the entire team. Here, disclaimer, there's no more heating than Bennett's, which is a single character, and Fiorina may cost you a little more to activate. The loads, especially if it is not Cone that already starts you with 150 loads, or C2, that practically with C2 you already know that in question of about 5 seconds in any team has full loads, and that is already Jesu Cristo, with which it is still very good team. Maybe you're missing a little life anyway. Xingqiu has to be inside TB for the Snapchat to throw the ulti Emilie, and throw the ulti into Bennett's ulti. Then at the end, there's a point where all of the characters enter some time inside Bennett, and they keep healing with what they keep giving Fiorina loads. But of course, it's not that you're playing with a Baiju or something, so it has incredible loads, but this one today is the best team unlike Emilie. Which is, like I say, a crackle with inverse Fiorina vaporized with Bennett's attack Bufo with a gross damage from Xingqiu. Without vaporizing very high, and above all, with all the synergies of Emilie, which is basically playing on a burn in enemy. These are the equipments, and there will obviously be more variants of the crackling equipment, but I would recommend this from far away these. They're the majority of Emilie's teams currently going into reverse retread burns that I'd say Grayley is the pick. And correct them that there will be more combinations, and that maybe a combination is happening to me in this video, but this is also the pick the prime of the cracking teams. Now we go to the teams that are not burn, because I will recommend you. Mainly 3 where it works better than I expected, where it has a better damage than it expected, and which can rival. With Nahida, even if it's practically less than a quarter of the damage, you'll hit on burn. And yet, it's very solid and very strong, and is divided mainly into 3 groups that are the teams of pure aggravation, i.e. simply Emilie or maybe. Emilie plus Baiju is a good combination applying for 2 electros or an electron anemo to a fairly year amount. Hi, then we have the teams of hyperluminormals that I will talk enough about them, that are basically the cores because of raw. Raiden's Chlorine may play here, which is Fiorina Nahida Baiju's core, now we talk about it. And then the teams of, and then Bloom's teams, where Emilie, the damage doesn't matter, but it's not bad at all. Where you want the app, and the app you need for those Bloom teams does it quite correctly. So let's start with the easy, talking about Bloom himself. Emilie on the Bloom teams will be watching a team with her Niluk, Xingqiu, and Emilie herself that I think she was playing, and as you see, Bloom's damage is brutal. The wings melt in less than a minute. Here on this team, Nilu Xingqiu is the core that most damage could give us, and it is Chero. Totally. Nahida here, let's remember that, just with the Master's bonus doesn't bring much more because the Blooms are split among all the characters on the team, and Nahida's Master's bonus in the end. You'd only take advantage of it if you forced yourself to generate all the Blooms with a character who was in the field with a Buffo and in Bloom. This doesn't happen, with which it doesn't matter. Nahida ticks are interesting, but Emilie's ticks are more interesting than reapplying along with the applicator. Hardest hydro in the game that is Shink, and makes this Bloom team a fucking savage. Shinkanilu, Xingqiu, Emilie, Nahida here. You can study Nahida and Emilie can be there. Remember, Emilie has the theme of applying to a single enemy, but the hit of the Ascension talent that usually stretch 2-3 by rotation does apply in area. And ulti hits apply a lot to all enemies, also in area, with which Emilie's Bloom team is very. And it's one of Emilie's strongest variants. Let's remember how I explained in the build that the Bloom teams didn't. It takes so much damage, can go with Favonius, can go with Memories of the Forest and others, and that the set of it does not go without teams of Burning will not be the set of Burn, and to finish the 2 most used cores from within today, that are the Aggravations. Or pure sprites can be played perfectly, as I said in the build, has the limitation that it is against a single enemy, but if you play a combination of Emilie and Baiju and then 2 Electros just like that is not bad. Maybe it can't surprise as much as the pure hyper blooms, where you do give us an app next to Baiju, or another inside pure inside. But I remembered I played the Yay AFK you are seeing now, that it is a Yay official Nahida Baiju, but I played Emilie instead of Nahida, and I said maybe this team doesn't convince me that much, but then I remembered that I have Nahida C2 and Nahida C2. What it does is lower the defense by 30% of enemies when they are affected by an electro reaction with inside, and I said wait if it convinces me if it makes the wings in a minute or less, because he expected a higher result as he had the expectation of comparing it with his own team. Nahida, but with Nahida's C2, and I'm not playing Nahida's C2. The enemies don't have a 30% less defense with it, like Emilie on this FK team, as well as the first team that explains you from Tighnari to mature pure meets very well, and he's a very good substitute for Nahida. You don't have the Master's Bufo like I said, but some teams don't either. You take advantage of a single character, but if you play against an enemy or you see it with a Baiju or another inside, it does give a very solid core, and now we're going with the team that I thought was going to work worse than it would just be a substitute. From Nahida more or less, and yet I repeat the second best within the game today, that are the pure Hyperblooms. That is to say, Alhaitham teams, the teams of Sino, the teams of Chlorind, the teams of the most played that could arrive. To agree Fiorina with Nahida, and then a final core heater that can be Kuki. If you go with Alhaitham, can be the same Kuki. If you go with Tighnari, or it can be Baiju. If you go with Sino, Chlorind, Raiden, and more combinations basically by combining with Baiju. You have an application exactly as amazing and a damage like sub DPS without having to activate the burn damage that is already a savage like or similar to Nahida, because as you see in several of these gameplays I am making ticks. With Emilie herself more than 20k a tick to the rhythm that Emilie is hitting, and that's faster than Nahida's ticks, then yes, that can be 40-50k, but then compensates Emilie's damage when she jumps the hit of the passive ascension talent that you go. As I say quietly, reaches Nahida's by rotation. Some cases might get over it, the application is fine. Yes, because Hyperbloom cores always combines dendro consonants. If you are going to play with a carry like Chlorind or Sino in field, you are going to play with Baiju, with which in multitasking is compensated. And as I said, the example is the one you are seeing now. That's a 12-1 first half that I thought was going to be a problem that room, and that I said good, don't wait long for this. Room will be a little more pass, and where you will see a good damage will be against the Ani or the triangle that is a Iterate, and yet. Turns out that room was a wreck. You're watching it all go missing, and the app was moderately correct because Emilie's elemental is applied in area the first tick, and when you throw the ulti also, leaves a number of strokes inside that. It's very interesting to then keep the dendro even if it's another time to make reactions. Hyperbloom jumps all over. Cooldown doesn't lose Hyperbloom and make them worse once you eliminate the first enemy. Emilie is already hitting the second, because it is true that it only hits an enemy with which, as long as you know to focus the enemy, that is applied by dendro. The dendro application, even if it's multitasking, it's going to be good if you combine two dendros in the electro carry equipment, I say, Chlorinde. But Raiden playing Fiorina, Emilie, Baiju. But it is also that if you play the other Hyperbloom core with a carry inside, that is then Alhaitham, Nahida, Fiorina, Kuki, but obviously we're talking about Emilie in these teams. Replacing Nahida, turns out that Emilie instead of Nahida makes it perfect, is the second best inside the game because you have Emilie's sub DPS damage. That's spectacular, and it's like I say the same thing above Nahida, but it's also that you don't have any application loss inside because you have the carry inside applying inside that. In this case, it would be either Alhaitham or Tighnari, and you have a similar core that you lose. In front of Nahida, the mastery of the character in the field, but it is also that in the carries within the mastery helps him for the damage. But whoever's exploiting the Hyperblooms is Kuki, which doesn't hurt you so much that mastery you lose in return. The damage as sub DPS that you earn apart from the energy that Emilie generates, that is also very interesting with which in teams. From Tighnari and Alhaitham, Emilie replaced Nahida incredibly well, very well. And in double teams inside with Sino, Chlorind carries Electro that you play Baiju, Fiorina, Emilie, and the carries Electro also does a spectacular job that would be a little bit more limited against an equal enemy against several, makes it better, is not better than Nahida in any case simply. Zedhi would be the best in the game after Nahida. But very surprised with Emilie's performance is a subbed DPS inside. That can enter perfectly must pull and does everything out of burn spectacularly well, both the blooms and the though. Aggravate Pur as mainly the best variants of Hyperbloom that are carries inside. Tighnari or Alhaitham consonants within, or those of carries Electro equal with consonants within Baiju, and that the carries Electro at Chlorind or Sino are the ones that exploit the Hyperblooms little more. These are the best teams today of Emilie. I already said punctual I will have stayed yet. I have not been able, for example, to try some equipment of Nouvelet, vaporizing on, burn, and so that there are variants like this with DGX too, and I will try them yet. I have not been able to prove them, but calmly, that if you come, I am going to keep testing all of this, so link down here, the description coming today to the height of being watching this video, because I will continue testing Emilie a lot of combinations. There I see them. See you later.